YouTube, and welcome to another tutorial for the VEX IQ Modkit development environment. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking control blocks, what they are, how to use them, and just kind of give an overview of what's available to us in Modkit. So control blocks are the blocks that give structure to your program. They tell different pieces of code to run, they make decisions, they literally control the flow of the program. Now, there's a whole section dedicated to these in your block view right here, and we'll click on another one so you can see this in the bottom middle, control. And they are all specified by this yellow color here. And they're kind of grouped together into different types of ones. So we have our event-driven blocks, our numbered loop blocks, our decision blocks, blocks that make a decision, and then we have kind of these two miscellaneous blocks down here. So now we're going to kind of go into each one and talk about when to use it, how it affects your program, stuff like that, and there will be timestamps down in the description. So if you're looking for a specific block, you can click on one of those and it'll take you right there. So let's kick things off with the event-driven blocks, starting off with our when block. Now this block essentially triggers code when an event happens. So our default here is start. Now the start event is just the start of the program. So this one's very useful because it will just say right when the program starts, run this code. And you can also, if you click this drop down, you can pick from other defined events or even define a new event. Let's say claw open. So this one will be one of your main controlling blocks. It's what kicks everything off based on different events. Now its sibling is the broadcast block. This one is also an event-driven block. In this case, it triggers the events. It's what lets other blocks know, hey, an event has happened. And as you can see, just like before, we can define a new event. Let's say claw close. And so when you hit this block, it's going to broadcast to every other part of the program, hey, the claw closed. And so that'll trigger when blocks. And it's very useful for having different pieces of code talk to each other, because it's not always easy to say otherwise, hey, when this block code happens, do this. A lot of times it's really easy to do that with a broadcast block. Moving on from the event-based blocks, we're going to talk about our defined loop blocks. So forever and repeat. These two blocks do a very similar thing in that whatever code that you put inside of them is going to be looped or done again and again. And the major difference is how many times they're going to loop. The forever block, aptly named, will loop forever. Unless you use a break block, another control block that we'll get to later, it will just keep running and running and running and running. So if you have, say, a light that you want to have flashing on and off the whole time the robot's on, that's the block for you. Its brother, the repeat block, you have to define how many times you want it to repeat. So say we want it to run 25 times. You can have that light flash on and off 25 times and then it will stop and it'll move on to the next thing. These blocks are really useful, again, for if you know how long you want something to repeat, whether that be a certain number of times or just keep on going and going. Moving on from our defined looping blocks, we have our decision-making blocks. And so we're going to start out with these two very, very, very similar blocks, our if and our if-else blocks. So the first thing that should be popping out is this hexagonal shape right here. And in our other blocks, our argument's always been kind of a drop down or something to type into, but I can't type in this. and it's kind of a different shape than the others, well, we're going to see that shape right up here in some of our other blocks. In particular, you're going to see it a lot in the operators block. And if we drag one of these in there, fits snugly in. And so we'll use these blocks in tandem with our control blocks to help the robot make decisions. We essentially define a equation inside of these, and that will boil down to either a true or a false. And if it's true, then it'll run the code inside of the if. And if it's false, then it'll fall outside of the if. In the case of the if-else block, if the decision is true, it's going to run the code inside of the true. If it's false, it's going to run the code inside the else. So if a binary decision comes with a binary choice of action, then you should go with your if and else block. But if you just have kind of a check and say, if this is happening, we need to do this, otherwise move on, then you're going to want to just use the if block. So those are the main decision-making blocks, but we also have this block right here, the while. And you'll notice it has that hexagonal argument as well. So this block doesn't make a decision the same way that the if one does. It does work such that it comes down to a true or a false, and then it does what's in here. But then it's going to come back up here and say, hey, is that still true? And it's going to run that code again. So just like our forever and our repeat blocks, this is a looping block. However, instead of running a certain number of times, it's going to run as long as the binary choice there is true. As long as our equation boils down to true, it's going to keep on running and running. So if it never changes, it is essentially either dead code that it never reaches if it's always false, or if it's always true, it works just like the forever block. However, in most cases, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a decision like, hey, has it moved the ARP up and down a certain number of times? Or, hey, are we still pretty far away from that wall? Then keep on moving. Things like that. A very, very powerful block. And what I use the most when I'm looping code. Our final category is the miscellaneous blocks. Inside of that, we're going to find the wait block. This block simply tells the program, hey, let's pause and stop running this and wait for a little bit. So you define how many seconds that's going to wait, from 1 second all the way to a whole lot of seconds. And it's good to kind of put at the end of a loop and say, hey, let's wait 1 second. Just kind of let the robot rest for a second and then keep on going. Or if you need it to wait in an autonomous run while another robot does something, it's useful for that. I don't use it a whole lot, but it is very useful when working with another robot especially. Now our final block here in this miscellaneous section is the break block. It's kind of a special block. You'll notice there's no arguments or anything to it. What it does is it jumps you out of a loop, or it breaks you out of that loop. So if I were to put this inside of my while block, it would run all the way until it hit break, and then it would ignore the decision and just go right on into the next thing. If I were to put it into my repeat block and it hits it, no matter how many times that code is run, it's going to jump past it now. And the same thing in forever. Usually it's just going to keep looping and looping and looping, but if it hits that break block, it's going to move on to the next thing. A very powerful tool when used correctly, but that's also in the reverse. It's going to really break your program if used incorrectly. So this has been the list of all the different control blocks that come at base with Modkit. If you are in the middle of programming and just need an extra hint as to what each of these blocks does, you'll notice these little question marks as I hover the mouse by each one. If you click on one, you'll see another little description of how they work, what their arguments are, and a little bit of a hint as to how you could use it. And I hope this tutorial just empowers you to start coding and just inspires you to just do something fun with it. Happy coding, YouTube.